Over the years, I've become more and more of a fan of using metal lures for shore bass fishing for a few reasons. One is their castability. There's not many lures that will cast as far as some of the metal lures that we can get hold of these days. Now, we know that a lot of bass are hooked, are taken very, very close to the shoreline. But there are occasions, and I'm finding increasing occasions, where it is an advantage to be able to get out a distance. So, for example, there's a little reef that you want to reach that you can't reach with other lures. There's a rock that bass will be around that you can reach that you can't reach with other lures. There's their ability to cope with the wind, how they cut through the wind really well, and you can still get out there and still cover a lot of ground, whereas some other lures maybe can't get out as far in those windy conditions. Their ability to cope with rough seas. So, for example, fishing on a surf beach with all that turbulent water. You're on that beach, it's a bit breezy, you can blast these metals out. They dig in well, they can cope with that surf, whereas some of the other lures maybe just get washed in too quickly, or they get washed sideways. The other great reason is their cost. At times you can buy 4 to 5 really good metal lures for the same cost as one popular hard lure like a plug. So that's another great reason. Now, metal lures are becoming increasingly popular for use in the surf. And I recently had a trip in the surf using a metal lure and caught a nice bass. And it was quite a rough surf, windy day, tipping down a rain. And they do work really well in the surf. So they're becoming increasingly popular. And of course we use them off the rocks. Fishing off the rocks where maybe you've got a little bit more depth of water. But what about using a metal lure over shallow, rough ground? Now I'm talking about ground that, let's say, at maximum casting distance, it's only about 10 feet or less. But when you draw that lure in, you're drawing it over some very shallow, rough ground where there's only a foot or two of water covering that rough ground, or you're drawing over a rocky ledge, but again, only about that much water covering it. The sort of ground where you would normally use, let's say, a shallow diving plug that only dives to a foot, a surface plug, or a weedless soft plastic. What about using a metal lure in those conditions? I recently had a couple of trips fishing over ground like that, shallow rough ground, where I would normally use shallow diving plug or a surface plug or a weedless soft plastic, and I used a metal lure. And this is the lure that I used. It's called a Westin Salty. It weighs 26 gram. But before I talk a little bit more about this lure, I just want to make it clear, just in case some of you wonder. I've got absolutely nothing to do in any way with the company that make these or anyone that sells them. So in other words, when I buy them, I pay just the same as you. It's just that I like to pass on lures that I find that are good and that catch. So it's a Westin Salty. Now the reason that I use this lure over this shallow rough ground is because of the fact that it is designed to, and it does work very, very shallow. And I'm talking about that it works shallow with just a slow to medium retrieve. Now, some of these other lures that I talked about, the Seeker and the F360, using the surf and off the rocks, they also work shallow. But if I was to take those to the mark that I fish in this video, I would have to reel them, even though they work shallow, I would have to reel them too quickly to skip them over that shallow rough ground. Or I'd have to hold the rod up high to get them to skip over that rough ground. So they work shallow, but not like this. This weighs 26 gram, but it doesn't feel like it's got any weight. And when it hits that surface, when you first cast it out, it sinks very, very slowly. So you don't have to panic to be able to get hold of the lure and start drawing it in. It's got a fantastic action, which you'll see later in the video. I won't say too much because I've mentioned it in the video, but part of the action is the reason why it works so shallow. So got a bit of a slalom action, but it works like that. It's got a rolling action. Rolls on its side like that. Not dead straight, slightly tint, if that's the right word. Now you notice I've got it rigged with a single hook. Anyone who watches my videos knows that where I can, I like to use singles now as opposed to trebles. And of course, like many of these lures, this is a new one, comes with a treble. It comes with the 2 split rings, like many of these Scandinavian lures do these days. These are mainly designed for sea trout fishing. They come with 2 swivels because it helps to keep hold of a fish, because there's less leverage the fish can create on the lure. It comes with 2 trebles, 2 split rings and a treble. So I've replaced it with a single hook. Now, little tips I want to give you about putting singles if you decide to go down that route on metal lures for bass fishing is, one, is stick a decent sized single on. 30, 40, that is a 40 single. And the other thing that I want to give you that I've found, and that I've only found this out by trial and error, by experimenting, is how you position the single. Notice how I've got it positioned with the hook point pointing up. In other words, it's not down like that, it's up. The reason for that is by experimenting, I found that the hook up is much better when it's pointing up like that rather than pointing down. But anyway, that's just a little tip. Okay, couple of trips over 2 separate sessions. In the first session, I didn't have much time. Rushed home from work. I had to rush down there in time to catch the time of tide that I wanted to fish. So I just gone down there and got on with the fishing. And also the weather forecast was set to come in really bad. So I just didn't want to mess around doing intros or anything like that. Get up with the fishing. So what I've done a bit of narration over the first session. But in the second session, I had a lot more time where I go into more detail and do live commentary. So we'll have a look at the footage and show you this fantastic lure for shallow rough ground, catching a few bass. I'm starting fishing here about 1.5 hours before low water. I have a stiff side wind, which this lure will cope with no problem, and I'll be able to cover a lot of ground searching for a fish. I'm just showing you the action of the lure here, that rolling, wobbling action. Hopefully you can see the shallow rough ground I will be drawing the lure over. The retrieve is just a straight, slow to medium retrieve, and I don't have to worry about the lure getting snagged as the water gets shallower, and you will see how shallow the lure comes in. I'm going to hook the first fish in a moment, and it took at maximum casting distance. A distance I could never reach with a shallow diving plug, a surface plug or a weedless soft plastic in these conditions. I'm casting towards a rock, so again rough ground at a distance. Okay, only a small bass, but a bass is a bass. And notice how it's hooked, no problem, with the 4/0 single hook. I've moved here to another spot, and again you can see the shallow rough ground. This time I will be casting straight into a stiff breeze. In a moment I will hook the second fish, and again hooked at a distance I can never reach with non-metal lures in this wind.
Gotta be a bit careful here.
Not a big fish, but a better size, just over 40 centimetres. And the main thing is that I caught, and again nicely hooked with the single hook. I'm just giving the fish a bit of time to recover before release. At the last spot here on my way in, and as expected the weather turned bad and difficult to film, but the fishing had gone quiet anyway, so time to call it a day and come back another day. Well, out again, see if I can catch another one. And the difference today is that I've got more time. I've got more time to do things like this and more time to do some live commentary. Plus, the weather forecast is better. Although it's very, very dull and grey at the moment, it's not supposed to rain. Well, there's not supposed to be a lot of rain, so that will make it easier for me to film. And it is supposed to brighten up. But for those of you that are interested, and I know many of you do ask me these questions via the comments, so I'm going to go through the tackle and the setup that I'm using. So I've got my my usual 8 foot, 15 to 40 gram lure rod. And on that it's a 4,000 size lure reel, which is loaded with 18-pound braid, and then joined to the end of the braid is about 2.5 to 3 feet of 15-pound fluorocarbon as a rubbing leader. And it's joined on this occasion by an FG knot. Now the reason I say on this occasion is because I chop and change. Sometimes I use knots these days, sometimes I actually just use a very, very small swivel instead of a knot. But usually when I tie the used knots I tie at home, I use the FG knot because it's supposed to be the strongest knot, so they say, and it's very, very thin. Find that easier to tie at home. But when I'm out fishing and I get a break off and I want to use another knot, then I tend to use an Albright special knot or a uni to uni knot, because I find when I'm out fishing, particularly if it's breezy and my eyesight is not that brilliant these days, even with glasses on, I just find it easier to tie those knots out fishing than the FG knot. That's just my personal preference. And then down at the end of the rubbing leader is a small link, a breakaway mini link to be able to clip the lure on, which is exactly the same as what I used on the previous session. Not going to change lures. In fact, that's the only lure that I've got with me. So hopefully I'll be able to show this very shallow working lure, great for over this shallow rough ground, catching another bass, even if it is only a small bass. Because I've got more time today, I'm here a little bit earlier in the tide. I'm going to be fishing about 3¼ hours of the ebb tide down to low water, and then fish a bit of the flood tide. Winds in a different direction, still breezy today. Winds coming across here today. The other session it was coming across from there, but still breezy, still a bit of a chop, and still good to fish this type of lure, which will deal with casting into this wind. And then when I fan cast to try and cover as much ground as possible, fish across the breeze over that way. Right, I'm just going to move myself across here out onto this ledge here. Might be able to cover a little bit more ground. Yeah, I think we'll get out onto this ledge here. Now this ledge I'm standing on goes out like that, like a finger. Oh, for probably about, from where I'm standing, 20 yards, maybe more. And you can see there, not a lot of water covering it. So, again, because this works so shallow, I should be able to skip it. Work it over this ledge here, this shallow ledge, without getting snagged, hopefully. Yeah, we're over the ledge now. I've actually seen bass come up over onto this ledge here with virtually hardly any water, and come and take a lure. If you're wondering why I do this, pull the rod back and reel fast, particularly in a crosswind, is to take up the slack as quickly as possible. When you're casting into a stiff crosswind like this, if you don't, well, one, as soon as the lure hits the water, is stop the line with your hand so you don't get a load of line pulled out, and then pull the rod back and reel as quick as possible to take up that slack. And also to try and prevent the pulling of the rod back, is to try and prevent actually reeling onto the reel slack line. In other words, trying to keep it under tension as best I can. That's just something for you beginners to lure fishing. Yeah, so you can see quite a brisk side wind. So when I cast straight across to the side wind, out. As soon as it hits the water, the lure, stop it, engage, pull back real quick until you can feel the tension of the lure. Well, as you can probably see, I had a move. I having any luck at the other mark. Sometimes it pays to move, sometimes it doesn't. On this occasion, it's paid off. Only a small one, but never mind, at least it's a fish. Now I'll quickly get it unhooked and get it straight back. Well, that's good. At least I haven't blanked on this session. Yeah, it's always interesting about moving. Do you move? Don't you move? As I said, sometimes it pays to move. If you're not getting any luck at one mark, and you've got the ability at some marks, some of the rocks marks I go to, it's not easy to move because you've got to clamber way up, back up cliffs and back down cliffs again. But some marks, if you can move, it sometimes pays. But so I'll stay and fish this for a while. I may go back to fish one or two other marks later. I'll try and show you again the action of this lure. It's very, very interesting action in the fact that you've got the dark on this particular colour of this one. You've got the dark on the back there, and the light underside, sort of a natural colour. And how when you're reeling the lure in, you actually see a lot of the underside, and that's because it's sort of, as I say, it sort of turns sideways on. I don't know if you could be able to see that, how you can really clearly see the white, because it does this. Oh, no, I've got it snagged. Right, let's do it again. See that? How you can clearly see the underside. Great action. I mean, that might be a reason why it works so shallow, because it's sort of swimming on its side. Not all the time, but it swims along on its side. Therefore, I expect that keeps it working shallow. An interesting thing, if any of you want to chip in and give your opinion about if you knew what the percentage was of bass that follow a lure without taking it to those that take it, actually commit and take it. Now, I reckon the percentage, doesn't matter what lure you're fishing with, the percentage of bass that follow a lure without taking is high. I mean, I've seen it so many times, back close in. Bass, maybe not just one, there'll be several, so they're competing, all turn away. You could argue that they see you, or you could be that just something makes them decide not to take the lure. Quite interesting, but I don't know what the percent, but I reckon it would be, I don't know, say, I reckon high. 70% of followers with no take to takers. But if you want to give your opinion, yeah, please do. Well, I've had another move, and this is my last move. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, see if I can pick up another one, and then got to call it a day. Where I'm here, this is some very, very shallow rough ground. Yeah, basically as far as I cast, it's just rough ground and shallow. I mean, would you believe it? I was on the verge of thinking I'll forget this now. Let's call it a day and go in and well, just goes to show that sometimes a move, I mean, it had gone completely dead at the other place, and this is not a bad bass by the looks of it. Yeah. Not a bad one. Best one of the trips anyway. Yeah, good. Well, we'll see. Well, that one goes 41. Fantastic. Oh, get it back. And off it goes. Well, I'm spurred on a bit now. Gonna carry on a little bit longer than I planned to. That's great. Yeah, for those of you that don't know, most of you do, but for those of you who don't, the main reason that I mentioned the size there is, well, curiosity and the fact that the size limit, the landing size limit, is 42 centimetres, and we're allowed to take 2 per day up to the end of November. This is 2020, so that one at 41 was under the size limit to be able to take it home, if you wanted to take it home. Well, I hope that has shown those of you that are not sure about putting single hooks on lures that they hook the fish fine. You lose fish even if you've got trebles on. Likewise, you'll lose the occasional one if you've got a single on. But positioning a decent sized single, particularly if you're going for bass, a good sized single on these metals, 3.0, 4.0, something like that. And as I mentioned earlier, position the single like I said, position it so it's up. Oh, we got one. They do bang well, bass. They really do. I wonder what size this one is. Oh God, my drag's too light. I'm reeling away there and treading water. Didn't realise the drag was loose. Hey, this feels like a decent one. Yeah, it does. Could it be? This feels like a decent one. Well, not a big one, but this might be the best of the sessions. Well, there you go. That one measured just over 43 and a half. So the best one of the session. So now I will carry on with this fading light and see if I can get some more. Well, as you can see, I'm in again. Well, this is proving to be a good session. Well, I got it all caught up in weed. Well, we'll get this one straight back. I can see that this is going to be undersized. Guesstimation, probably about 40, maybe. Might make 41, but we'll get it back. Off it goes. Well, that turned out to be a really good session. Earlier on, I thought, oh, it's not going to be very good today, so I'm glad I carried on, and yeah, I'm really pleased. A great session in the end. But to be honest, I've had enough now. I could carry on. I've had enough because at my age now, it's all right for you youngsters, but at my age, certain other pleasures in life tend to get the better of me when we get to a certain time of the day, and we're getting towards that time now, or it will be when I get home, and it's what I call beer o'clock, 6 o'clock, beer o'clock, where I like to have a couple of beers and chill out. And those couple of beers are really going to go down well today after this session. I'm really, really pleased. But also, I hope it showed you once again that metal lures definitely have a place in modern bass fishing, as many of you have found out, and that they're not just for fishing surf beaches, where you're fishing over basically clean ground, over sand, fishing in the surf, or fishing off the rocks where you've got a bit of depth, that given the right lure, you can still fish them at marks over shallow rough ground, like here, whereas let's say you would normally fish, let's say a shallow diving plug, like a tackle house feed shallow, or a IMA Komomo, both that only dive to about a foot, or a weedless soft plastic, or a surface lure. Now, given a metal lure that you can still work slowly, so I'm not talking about a metal lure where you have to work it quickly to get it to stay above that rough ground, that you can still work it slowly, slow to medium retrieve, and still work it when there's only about a foot to say 2 foot over the rough ground, and work it without getting snagged. So once again, I hope you found that useful, and many, many thanks for watching.